Okay, so we're going to have our first question from...
When you get up, can you just give your name and where you're from and then your question? Okay. And we've got a minute.
Hi, my name is Melanie Dante. This center works with the U.S. Prostitutes Collective in alliance with Swap Behind Bars and ESP in Philly. They've asked me to ask, since criminalization and fear of arrest is an obstacle for sex workers to report rape and other violence, would you support prioritizing the prosecution of violent crimes over the prosecution of prostitution offenses?
Good question.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know why any sensible person would think it's more important to go after sex workers than to go after violent criminals. That to me is a no-brainer, and I appreciate the question. As for the voting question,
Yes.
I cannot comment on a particular case, but I can say this: voter fraud's a big deal, and it shouldn't happen, and it should be prosecuted like any other. Not being a long-standing politician, in fact, I'm so not long-standing, I barely know what I'm doing. Not being a long-standing politician, there's really nobody I need to cover for, there's nobody I need to thank. I can do that in a very even-handed way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your name and where you're from.
Yes, my name is Hassan Lloyd from Project Strawberry Mansion. We're a self-help community organization in North Philadelphia. My question is this: will you dedicate members of the District Attorney's Office to review those cases of conviction that were in question by the previous DA and his corruption in those prosecutions? We have at least 3 or 4 cases that we represent in our community, trying to get the attention of the DA's office to review these cases and give these men a chance to have a fair and just trial.
So thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Let me just make sure I understand the question. The question is, will this DA's office be willing to look at convictions that have already occurred where the process appears to have been corrupt, biased, tainted, where there's the possibility of innocence? And the answer to that is yes. There is currently a conviction integrity unit in the DA's office. It used to be a complete joke. Now it's not a complete joke. It's getting a little better, but it's nowhere near of the quality and of the size that it should be. We're getting a lot of help from people who have studied conviction integrity heavily. One of them is Barry Scheck, who's the guy who actually founded the Innocence Project. He was at an event with me last night, and he graciously offered to assist. We were in a meeting today with people from the Quattrone Center at the University of Pennsylvania, which is it's a local bunch of academics who work very specifically on how you go after conviction integrity and look for mistakes. One of the tactics you use is if you find a detective who's engaged in illegal practices or somehow seems to be around innocent people getting convicted in the past, you look at more than that case. You know, you have to be willing to do the difficult thing, which is when there's a red flag, chase that red flag. Whether that red flag is, how come they never video confessions down at homicide even though every room has a camera in it? Or if that red flag is a particular detective is always accused of beating people up, and you know, it turns out that a particular detective takes confessions to things that never occurred, and we have at least one of those in Philly, who takes a confession to a sequence of events that is not what occurred. When you start to see that, you know you're dealing with a huge problem, and it's very unlikely that dirty practices only occurred once. It is much more likely that those dirty practices occurred over and over. So yes, we're going to have a conviction integrity unit that is for real. It's going to be a conviction integrity unit that is willing to, even though it's difficult, look at that red flag and then follow that red flag where you have to go in order to get at it. Now, as for specific cases, obviously I cannot make any promises, but I will say this. As of January the 8th, if I am fortunate enough to be elected, then I would be in office. And at that point, we would welcome a look at any individual cases. And I'm not telling you what we would do or not do, but I am saying we don't want innocent people in jail. It is wrong, it is unjust, it destroys faith in the system, and it means the guilty person went free.
Thank you so much. Excellent.
So I thank Larry Krasner. Most of the questions are going to be to that issue, since a lot of families here that's about to ask you almost the same thing.
We got a young person.
Hello.
My name is Kira Coffee. Jerome Coffee is my uncle. I'm from Philadelphia. And I wanted to know, are you willing to open up old cases with new evidence? Example like the PCRA?
Thank you, Kira. Obviously, even though you have a t-shirt on with your relative, and I respect the fact that you love your family so much, I can't talk about that case right now, but I can talk about the issue you raised. The PCRA is the Post-Conviction Relief Act. Basically, when you have a trial, after the trial, if there's a conviction, comes an appeal. And the idea of the appeal is to show that the judge made a mistake. If you don't win the appeal, then after that comes the Post-Conviction Relief Act proceedings, which can happen once or sometimes more than once. And essentially that is to show that the lawyer screwed up. Doesn't necessarily mean the lawyer's a terrible lawyer, but it means the lawyer messed up. In the same way, doctors mess up sometimes in an operation, even if they're good doctors, and they make a mistake. Lawyers sometimes mess up. They don't line up a part of the evidence. They don't present it properly. They don't file a motion they should have. PCRAs exist for the very important reason that especially when you have a lawyer who is not competent, or a lawyer who is alcoholic, or a lawyer who never prepares the case, there may be a whole bunch of innocent people sitting in jail as a consequence of that. Or it may very well be that even people who are guilty but got a sentence that was much longer than they should have may have a claim that that lawyer really screwed up the opportunity for the defendant to get fair treatment. Sometimes, in order to file a PCRA, in order to file a motion, you have to show that there's new evidence, that there's something brand new. My office, consistent with the law, is going to be very open to looking at new evidence, especially where that evidence tends to show the possibility of innocence or that there's actual innocence, things of that sort. We have to be. I mean, honestly, who would want this job if you're going to spend your time defending innocent people being in jail? I mean, I know that maybe sounds like a nutty answer because we're so used to offices that do defend the idea that every conviction is good and no one in jail is innocent. But that's ridiculous. And anybody who's read the newspaper or has heard of DNA knows that's ridiculous. And therefore, we have to very carefully be willing to look at cases where there are real indications. Just one thing that we could do with this DA's office is to agree to DNA testing whenever it makes sense. Why is this hard? What is difficult about it? All it does is give everybody closure. It gives the family of the defendant closure, gives the family of the victim closure, gives them closure. I mean, it's fairly compelling evidence of truth. It has confirmed, for example, that the Central Park joggers never did it, even though they all confessed. I mean, we have to be open to these things. It is beyond me why a DA's office wouldn't agree to do DNA in almost every reasonable situation.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Karen Ali, and I work with an organization, the Human Rights Coalition. I'm the wife of a person who's been incarcerated over 46 years for a crime he did not commit. However, I'm here tonight to ask this question of you. As your role as DA in the city of Philadelphia, would you and how would you advocate for the release of women lifers serving multiple decades in prison? How would you advocate? What would your role be in that?
Great question. So, there are a few ways to try to address this. Pennsylvania is one of those places where every now and then we get a judge who just likes to give time. And in those situations, they may take a case that's not all that serious and give you 10 to 20 plus 10 to 20 plus 5 to 10 plus 3.5 to 7 until a very long sentence comes up and people, even though they didn't get a life sentence are basically going to serve a life sentence. Under those circumstances, there will be parole hearings. And the district attorney can certainly make recommendations where it's appropriate that parole should be granted, that keeping people longer is excessive. The more difficult situation comes where you have people who are actually serving a sentence of life without parole. That occurs in first-degree murder, it occurs in second-degree murder, has occurred with a lot of juveniles. And juveniles have a whole different track because of what the U.S. Supreme Court has done recently. They will get resentencings. The DA will be able to make recommendations in that context. And certainly, if I'm lucky enough to be DA, I will take that role very seriously. But the toughest part is when you have, for example, a woman who's serving life without parole because she supposedly was involved with a robbery didn't pull any trigger, was out in a car, but she's convicted of second-degree murder, and she's doing life just the same. I had a conversation today with a gentleman who is very knowledgeable about the state prison system, and he told me that about one-third of the people who are serving life without parole are people who were not the person who fired the gun, and who were convicted of second degree, meaning that it was in the course of a robbery, the robbery did not go as expected, there was a tragic result in which people got killed, all right? Pennsylvania is different than a lot of states in that regard. They are very, very punitive about any involvement, even if you're not pulling the trigger. So there's very limited recourses there. The law is clear that when you have a sentence of life without parole, judge can't just let you out. There are commutation proceedings, and that is an area in which the district attorney can certainly make recommendations. There have only been about, I think, 6 commutations since Ed Rendell. There have been 3 in the last, I guess, approximately 3 years, which is more than usual. And we do have a group that is more open to commutation than it used to be, but we all know that it is not granted often enough, that there's too much politics in this, and that even the district attorney's office in Philadelphia does not have a ton of control over what happens with commutations. In fact, unless I'm mistaken, I think they have to be unanimously granted by every member of the board, which means in a political world it's going to be pretty hard to do that. But that is one area in which we can try to do this. There is another area in which I think a district attorney can be of assistance, although it's indirect. And that is that there have been some efforts to change the law. There have been proposals that for anyone serving a sentence of life without parole, at some point, maybe 15 years, maybe 25 years, there would be consideration of parole. In other words, pass a new law that says for anybody serving life without parole, in the future, in the past, there will be a parole hearing after, for example, 15 years. That's the more recent proposal. The only role a DA can play there, because DAs don't pass laws, they're not in the legislature, they don't get to vote on it. The only role a DA can play is to be supportive. It's to use the office as a way to speak out and explain why this is a good thing. And I do believe that's a good thing. And I can tell you a real fast story if you want, but the real fast story goes like this. I represented a pretty bad criminal, honestly, pretty rough dude, who'd done a bunch of bank robberies and did a house robbery with a bunch of kids in there. And he took off with all the stolen items, took off with the car, had pointed the gun at the kids. It was a bad case in federal court. He was looking at 30 years. He decided that he was not going to cooperate and talk about anybody else. He decided that he was not going to try his case. He's just going to take his 30 years because he knew he got caught. While he's waiting, pled guilty, while he's waiting to be sentenced to what his guidelines required to be about 30 years in jail, a 5-foot-tall woman guard, 5'2" maybe, in the federal prison was attacked by a male inmate who was over 6 feet tall, who'd taken a toilet brush, pulled all the bristles out of the brush, sharpened the edge, and used it like an ice pick to stab her in the neck. Got on top of her and stabbed her in the neck over and over. My guy, this bad criminal, surrounded by all these other inmates, sees this, and my guy jumped in, took a hold of the weapon, pushed the guy away, saved the guard's life, because he just thought it was disgusting what was going on, while the other inmates, who were kind of upset and agitated but were not courageous enough to jump in, stood there. So my guy's facing 30, but he just saved the life of a prison guard. And then I had to go to the feds, who are not exactly merciful people, and I had to say, come on, this has got to be worth something. I got a letter from the warden saying he saved the life, and I also have the video, because we have the video. It's inside of a federal facility, one of those facilities where there's not enough guards. So the guards had to come from elsewhere for like a minute and a half while this guy is saving her life, right? Well, even this U.S. Attorney's Office eventually said, you're right, that's worth something. We got to do something. And they came in and said, give him 15. And he got half the amount of time. And we can debate whether that's the right amount or not, but they recognized he'd done something real. So now let's imagine that same situation if my guy was doing life without parole. No matter what he did, there would have been no way to reward that behavior. No matter what he did, there would have been no motivation other than just whatever goodness was in him to save the life of that person. When you have life without parole, you endanger guards, you endanger inmates, you potentially are making a situation that is ripe for riots. I think it is crazy and foolhardy at many levels, but including just the level of caring about the lives of the guards, caring about the lives of the other inmates, to have a system in which you could never consider parole for someone who may have been sentenced when they were 18 years old or 20 years old. So that is why that is one reason why I support legislation that would make people eligible for parole, so that we can have a safer situation for everybody, but also because it's just proper. I mean, the reality is, you talk to experts on this about what it means to be a lifer, they will tell you that almost anybody over 55 is safe enough to hit the streets. And these are people in corrections. And they're saying it based on data that makes it clear that lifers, people who've been convicted of homicide, lifers are among the most non-violent inmates especially when they get back past a certain age. I know that's not what the public thinks, because the public's all about reading comic books, but that is the truth.
Sir.
Thank you.
Oh, you're gonna hold it. Okay, so hi, my name is Nina Boyd Williams from the Northeast, actually from all over the city. I lived everywhere in the city. I'm in the Northeast now. So my question is, I'm trying to pose this question correctly. I'm a parent who dealt with DHS, and this twice, okay? And so I have experience with what is going on in the Philadelphia Family Court. And my question is, and I've talked to several mothers who are going to DHS. For mothers who, and families who are experiencing what they feel, and some can prove is fraud by the court, biased, or that the judges have are influenced a lot by the city solicitors who are representing the DHS social workers and the core workers. What protections do the mother and the children have when these people are coming to court, and the lawyers, we feel, are also working under like a color of law, or all of them against us in the court? We're basically by ourselves. And some of the parents have had gag orders where they can't talk. A lot of the parents, including myself, even though our lawyers are not representing us, we've been threatened. Like, I've been threatened by a judge saying, you better not represent yourself. You don't know what's going to happen to you if you try to represent yourself. So it's basically where we're not having our due process, our fairness in the court, and then our children are illegally taken from us because they are not made to show the evidence or anything as to why that they have our children in the first place. So what we've been having a hard time with is when we call the DA's office, they're like, we only deal with this and this. No one actually really wants to deal with the corruption, the fraud, the illegal taking of the children, and we are #1 in the country of them taking our children. Okay, we're no worse than anyone else. But I think that we don't have any oversight over the workers and over the, like, it's like they are very, what should I say, rogue, and believe me, I've called everyone, the IG, AG, any letter you have, the mayor, the governor. I talked to the mayor 2 or 3 times, the governor's office. I've sat in there, I've went up and down the commissioner's office, but when they tell you to go to the commissioner's office, we find that they protect because they're all together. They're not going to oversee them. So we want some of these protections, like the letter she used for the criminal thing, where if you've gotten your child taken, me and we both and the children have suffered, abuse, and they find that the children are suffering way worse than in care than what they would have if they were with their mom. So is it going to be like any kind of office, ombudsman office, or are you going to be willing to look into complaints about fraud or bias, perjury in the court, family court, so that the kids won't be taken away if they,
Thank you.
Perjury is a crime in Pennsylvania. I do not know why this district attorney's office does not charge it more often. I can tell you that I've had cases where I had video of an event, more than one, and the video was 100% contrary to what people testified to under oath. It was not in that particular context, but I've had it, and I've turned to the DA's office and said, you got to charge these people with perjury. What are you doing? And they wouldn't do it. And there has been this weird thinking in the DA's office that you never charge perjury because you don't want to frighten witnesses from coming to court, or because you don't want to cross police officers, or because you don't want to stop a victim from coming to court. When the video showed that what occurred here was not the fight that this person who called himself a victim described, it was actually a fight that was started by the person calling himself a victim. So it is a weird thing that this DA's office hasn't pursued perjury. It's one of those crimes that totally undermines people's faith in the court system. It's one of those crimes that allows bad results to happen in a courtroom. It's one of those foundational things. If you're going to have a court system, telling the truth better mean something. Your oath better mean something. So this is an office that will be open to charging perjury in the proper cases. Obviously, when you charge perjury, you have to have pretty strong evidence, because people always come to court and say different things, otherwise you wouldn't be in court, right? But you have to have strong evidence. If you're asking me more specifically about child custody process, I have to be candid with you, that's not the kind of work I have done. And you're talking about DHS, but you're also talking about the city solicitor's office, which is a different office than the DA's office. Right, but I think what you're asking me, right, I think what you're asking me is, will the DA's office be willing to go after a DHS worker who is lying? And the answer to that is, if the evidence is there, yes. Will it?
Thank you. So we gotta move on to the.
No, you need to let me answer your question. So the answer is that I will not be in office unless I'm elected. That's November 7th. If I am elected, I'll be sworn in on the 8th of January. By that time, there will be a clear procedure so that the public can make complaints about all sorts of things. And there will be a way to try to bring that information to our attention. Now, I'm not saying that we will or will not do something in a particular case, so we're clear. But I am saying that we're going to look at all these things, all these complaints in a very even-handed and fair way. And if we find perjury, we're going to go after it. It's perjury coming from people who are paid by the taxpayer to tell the truth is even more troubling than perjury coming from people who were never paid by the taxpayer to tell the truth.
All right, thank you. We're gonna have to wrap the questions up to 1 minute.
So, you all heard that we have to make sure we're at least a minute long. It's just a minute long. Okay.
Hi, my name is Minerva Burge. I would like to ask a question. Some of the questions I had have been answered by previous people, but speaking of perjury, I have a son that's been incarcerated for over 21 years, and how can I put this? Okay, when you have a paid attorney and you're charged with 7 crimes, and you get acquitted of 6 and have to have a case later on, and then with the court-appointed attorney, you get found guilty, and then you get retaliation, and you get a harsh sentence for 1 conspiracy and 1 robbery, 32 to 64 years. Tried the second time, the prosecutor, it's in the notes of testimony, perjured himself, withholding evidence, conviction overturned, tried again. So my question is, would you look into corruption and punishment when the prosecutor office commits perjury, or look into unfair and harsh sentencing?
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Obviously, again, I can't comment on a specific case, but I will say this: any prosecutor who pulls some of the tricks that I've seen pulled, destroying statements, forcing witnesses to say things they don't want to say, deliberately lying to the court in order to delay a case for their own advantage, any prosecutor who is lying to the court, lying to the jury, destroying evidence, not complying with the requirements that are necessary so we have a system that acquits the innocent and convicts the guilty. Any prosecutor doing that is going to be lucky just to be fired, because a lot of them are going to get locked up and charged. We cannot have a court system where prosecutors think they can do whatever they want And unfortunately, this DA's office at certain times has had some prosecutors who did exactly that. They have had some prosecutors who did that in the homicide unit, and they have had some prosecutors who did it during certain periods of time. And we know this not just from the fact that there have been multiple exonerations during that period of time, but I mean, I know some of that from my own experience, from having seen and heard the things that particular prosecutors did. So we cannot have a system where it's okay for police to be unaccountable, where it's okay for DAs to be unaccountable. We can't have that. And look at the reality. I mean, let's be honest about this. The last DA is in jail. Okay? The man went to jail. You don't see a whole bunch of private attorneys saying, well, lawyers can never go to jail. Lawyers are all perfect. That would be ridiculous. We all recognize that's ridiculous. Well, it's also ridiculous within that office. It's not just ridiculous as to the main one. It's ridiculous for any of them. They can all go to jail if they want to commit crimes. Just like poor people can go to jail if they want to commit crimes. Just like rich people can go to jail if they want to commit crimes. We have to be even-handed about this, whether you got a uniform or not, whether you got a badge or not, whether you're DA or not. So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Sheila Harper. I'm with the Asia Adams Save Our Children Foundation. Asia Adams was my daughter. I am a direct victim of homicide of my only child. The whole experience was 2 trials, and it was horrible because they expected me to sit there and not respond to some of the things that I was hearing. The advocate that was actually there showed up on that day, no contact prior or subsequent. It was horrible. So that's my question. What commitment to the advocates or the support, people does your office perceive to happen in the future? I have a second question. I also, part of the Asia Adams Foundation, we work with the Child Homicide Review Committee, and we review every death of every child under age 21. The district attorney's office has been very much involved in the past. Now that we are going to be changing things, that was George Mosey. Yeah. Are you going to be involved? Because of course, the thing that we are attempting to do is to look at all of the details, whether it's education, whether it's mental health, drug and alcohol, all the circumstances surrounding that child to come up with a prevention approach. How committed are you to that?
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, as for question 2, very committed to that, and I would actually love to get more input on that. I've been working with a number of victims advocates who I think, some of whom you may know. I don't know if you're familiar with Movita Johnson-Harrell from the Charles Foundation. All right, also the mother of a homicide victim. I had a very interesting meeting with Jennifer Storm, who was appointed by the governor to be the statewide victims advocates. And some of the things that they're talking about are the same things that you are talking about. So yes, I'm very interested in part 2 of your question. I'm very interested in being involved with that. Part 1 of your question is, what are you going to do for victims? I am so glad you asked me that question, because I don't always get that question. But let's just talk about a couple things. I'm going to make a guess, and I don't want to get into your private experience, because I know this is a very traumatic subject for any parent. But I'm going to guess that when you found out that your child had been killed, that information was given to you by a detective or maybe a police officer. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that goes on in Philadelphia is that when there is a killing, detectives are often trying to do 2 things. They are supposed to go and tell the family this horrifying news. The family immediately undergoes this tremendous trauma. Family will quickly have to make decisions around funeral arrangements and may or may not have the funds to do it. There's a process through the state where the funds can be brought down. It becomes a very difficult process. There may be danger for members of the family in certain cases, not all cases. And there is an immediate need for counseling or help with trauma and maybe many, many other things, right? We don't have an agency, like many cities do, where people who are not police go to the door to tell the family members, I hate to tell you this, but your child has been killed. And this is what's going to happen. And this is how I can help you now with this problem. And this is how I can help you with this other problem. What we have now is detectives who come to a crime scene and they are supposed to be looking for witnesses who may be scurrying off, and they're supposed to make sure that the forensics are being collected properly. So we have the shell casings, we have the DNA if there is any, we have fingerprints if there are any, we have good photographs of the scene. They're supposed to be doing all of that, but instead what they're doing is bringing this terrible news and then trying to run out the door because they are in fact supposed to be detectives. They're not supposed to really be victims advocates. I would be very, very interested not only in establishing an office that exists for the purpose of aiding families of homicide victims, but I'd be interested in having it work in a fashion where the person who comes to the family and explains to the family what has occurred remains with that family through the entire process until it is completed. I don't think that's impossible to do. We got a broke city, we have a DA's office that is funded much less than similarly sized offices, but my understanding from speaking to the statewide victim advocate is that there's going to be an increase in funding coming for a bunch of boring reasons, but an increase in funding. And she was kind enough to talk to me about her sense that this would be a good idea, and I think she's absolutely right. I think it would be a good idea to separate these things out so that the family gets constant attention, constant care, they get protection, and yet the detectives are relieved of this burden so they can go work on the case. The family's going to keep calling that detective over and over and over out of all of their needs and all of their pain, unless they have someone who is there to help them with those issues. And therefore the detective is going to be probably rude or probably not answer, not because they want to be mean people, but because they're pulling their hair out saying, my God, I want to go try to solve this case for you, and I'm on the phone with you every 2 days. So I think we need to separate those things out. I think that can make a big difference. And we also need to understand fundamentally that trauma needs to be addressed, because over and over and over, we find that people who kill other people have been traumatized when they were younger. They have seen violence, they have experienced violence, they have been raped, things have happened to them, and if you don't address this trauma, it is a pretty well established phenomenon that you will see that trauma repeat, and you will see crimes that are coming out of trauma that's not addressed. So I can't think of anything that would be more important than trying to go directly at the needs of victims.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janice Barksdale. In April 24th, 1977, an article came out in the Philadelphia Inquirer called The Homicide Series. In this article, there were a number of police officers and detectives in the 39th District that were corrupt. And they had people put in jail illegally. Some of those people are still in jail today. 18 years later, another article came out in 1995 which said corruption may reopen murder cases of the 39th District. At that time, Lynn Abraham was running for the DA, and she promised that anyone that was put in jail due to police corruption the cases would be thrown out. Today, those people are still in jail. Some of them have received new cases as late as 2007. It is 2017, and those people are still in jail. What would you do as a DA to reopen those cases? That's all I have to ask.
Okay, thank you for that question. Again, obviously I can't comment on any particular case or any particular group cases, but you are speaking to an unusual candidate for DA in that I have not only filed lawsuits against police for brutality, I filed lawsuits against them for corruption. In the most recent trial of a group of officers which occurred in federal court who were accused of a whole series of lying, cheating, and stealing and brutalizing accusations around their work in the narcotics unit. In that trial, the lawyer who was involved in kicking the lid open on that was me. I don't know if you know what's happened since then, but there have been almost 800 drug convictions overturned, and some of those convictions involved some very long sentences. Some of them involved, for example, a bus driver who lost his job, lost his house, and lost his marriage when he ended up doing 5 years in jail, even though he fought the case, took the stand, and explained that he was innocent. Well, his conviction was overturned, but only after he'd gone through all that and served those 5 years. I know another attorney whose client did 15 years in jail for that sort of thing. So you're talking to someone who understands that there is such a thing as police corruption, that there is such a thing as people being wrongfully convicted and wrongfully in various different ways. You know, we need to take those things seriously. Now, having said that, my position as a candidate, my position before I would be in office, if I'm lucky enough to get there, was that I can't look at specific cases, but as of January 8th, if cases are brought by attorneys, or if cases are brought by families to the attention of my office, there is going to be a conviction integrity unit that we are going to polish and improve and grow, and they will have a chance to look even-handedly at particular cases to see whether or not they believe that there has been an injustice. The obligation of a prosecutor is to seek justice. So if you find an injustice, then you got to fix it.
And don't let them bully you either. Don't let this department of police bully you. If they do, we got your back.
Yup.
If you get in office, if you fulfill this stuff, they're going to come down on you. But you got to let us know, and the people will back you because the power is in us.
Hi, my name is Nadira. I'm from Philadelphia. I want to know if you know anyone that might can help me get my children back, because they was adopted out like almost a year ago through DHS.
I'm sorry to hear that. I think what you're probably asking is, can I refer you to an attorney or an organization who could help you with that? I cannot, but I may be able to find someone who can. So why don't I give you a telephone number? It's not really my field. I know some attorneys who are around it. So maybe we can give you a number for my law office, and they can find someone who's good in that field. We'll give you 2 or 3 names, and you can try with them. All right? So, and before you leave, we try to leave you with a number that you can call tomorrow. All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Next question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vidia Fisher. And I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm not proud of it, but I just wanted to, tell you that my question is, when are the judges are going to be accountable for their wrongdoings? Because I've experienced a lot of injustice in the court system, in the criminal justice system, and also in family court. And I appreciate everyone's questions. Before Charles Ramsey, before he retired, he helped me. I don't want to bash my hometown. I'm an alumni of the Hartford College for Women in West Hartford, Connecticut. And what I learned from the experience is that women are supposed to stick together. And I'm a single mom of triplets. But while my triplets were in a foster home, they were abused and they were neglected. And my judge was Judge Fernandez, so he was aware of it. And I wanted to say that I wanted to say that that the laws should be universal, for you all were talking about juveniles underage and doing time. I think that the law should be universal for them. And also I recognize it's a lot of black on black crime, and they keep saying that the crime rate is up 20%. When Charles Ramsey was here, he did a great job. He was dealing with a lot of the corruption that you're talking about. So he left. And since then, it's been all this crime.
So what's your question, Ms.?
My first question is, when are the judges going to be accountable for what they're doing? Because a lot of times when you report them to Harrisburg, they're all in cahoots. So it's like you never really get anything done. And then also,
Let him answer that.
okay.
Okay, that's a great question. The reality is there's some excellent judges, there's some terrible judges, there's some judges in between. But what you're describing is the feeling, and I think you're correct, that there is no real remedy. The judges have so much power that there's no real accountability.
They abuse their power and their control.
Let me answer your question, please. So, yeah, I mean, I've been in court 4 to 5 days a week. And I have been doing that for 30 years. And I have seen many judges who do just that. I've also seen some judges I thought were heroic. I've also seen some I thought were mediocre. I mean, that's just how it is. But having said that, what can we do to make it better? Well, really, the most important thing, the strongest thing people could do to really make it better, if that's what you really want to do, is you have to organize and vote on retention. What happens in Philadelphia is judges have their position, not for life, but in the Court of Common Pleas, they'll have it for 10 years, and then they come up for retention, meaning you get to vote yes or no, keep him, keep her. For municipal court, they come up every 6 years, I think it's 6 years, and you get to vote yes or no, keep them. Nobody ever gets a no vote. The last no vote that happened in Philadelphia County for a Court of Common Pleas judge or a municipal court judge was in 1968 when Louis Lipschitz was indicted.
That's great.
And they voted him out. There is a very long tradition of all the voters in this entire city just going, keep them, yup, all the way down the line. So you have a few judges on the bench who are alcoholic and out of control, who will show up at 10:30 and leave at 11 after they sing a song. And you have some judges who think it's really funny to give a kid with a first case the maximum possible sentence because they made the case go to trial. They don't really care about the crime. They care about the fact that the judge couldn't go home before lunch. I mean, that is not the average judge, but there are some judges who are just that bad, right? And you, as voters, have all this power to identify them and to say no, 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 no. And if you did that, they're gone. You and I both know you can go to the Bar Association, you can go to the Judicial Inquiry and Review Board, you can call their supervisor all you want. The chances you're driving a judge off the bench by doing that are next to nothing. But the way that every single election cycle, you could turn some of them out, the ones who deserve it, is on that retention vote.
That's right.
So I would love to see, well, you know, that's a great question too. There are certain ways that judges are reviewed. The problem is it tends to be kind of biased. You know, if all the public defenders don't like a certain judge, they'll vote a certain way. If all the prosecutors don't like a certain judge, they'll vote a certain way. So those reviews are not always accurate. Some people get good reviews just because they're political. Other people get good reviews and deserve them. Other people get good reviews and don't, right? So it's complicated. I can tell you this, there was one judge who ended up on the front of the Daily News 2 days before the election, because the Daily News was coming down hard on his being a crazy, out of control alcoholic. He ended up getting more votes, right? So, I mean, I think what you have to do is we need to have people you trust who are knowledgeable in the court system, who get together indications so that you would have ideas of who to vote for and who to vote against. And then you organize around that. And if you want to see bad judges, and there are plenty of good ones, but you want to see bad judges quaking in their boots, turn a couple of them out.
Absolutely.
And see what the courtroom looks like next time you go. Most of the family court judges are Court of Common Pleas. In certain contexts, there is municipal court. But every election cycle, there's a whole bunch of judges up for retention.
Even doing yours.
That's right.
There were so many judges on it. Well, that's the key. You have to know who the judge is. When he just ran in the primary, there was a whole slew of judges up for election.
I mean, honestly, I would love to see an organization set about putting up a website where this information is.
And maybe we'll do that to help people know.
As you speak,
All right, next.
that you're going to do, most people don't know that, so could you emphasize that to let the people know that they have the power? Like you're speaking to us, you're reaching a small group, but as you campaign and you let people know that they have the power, you know, Just an idea. I'm a volunteer with you.
Thank you. Next question, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Carrie Krieger. Philadelphia is rich with world-renowned experts on trauma theory, specifically at the Healing Heart program at Drexel University. They've been able to train a small amount of Philadelphia police. Would you support the effort to expand that as maybe even a mandatory training across all law enforcement, including the court systems and the DA's office?
And what would that training look like? And who's gonna pay for it? Yeah, who's
So,
gonna pay for it?
the answer is, I don't feel like I know enough about trauma, but I do know something about it.
They're friends of mine, I can put you in touch.
I would support a much more trauma-informed DA's office. I would encourage the police commissioner who controls police training to have a much more trauma-informed police department. I would encourage there to be more information in the judiciary for the judges on trauma. I'm in favor of all that. I don't control the judiciary, I don't control the police department, but if I'm elected, I would have control over the DA's office, and I would very much be interested in exploring that further and making sure there is further training and information about trauma in that office.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Wanda Walker, right next door, Read Ready Daycare. I'm wanting to ask, if you become DA, which you should, and you probably will, what would be the one thing that you would do that could make a difference? And I know you speak a lot of facts, and it seems like your heart's in the right place, and you know all the statistics, but what could you guarantee as a DA that you could do the minute you get in office to make a difference in what's going on right now?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The answer is, turn out the worst people and hire the best ones. Because that is called culture change. There's only so much one person can do in the DA's office, no matter what their position. But if you bring in the right people and you help exit the wrong people, you can make a huge difference.
Your name is your father.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ivalu Miranda. I'm Cuban American, and my question is simple. How would you protect Philadelphia as a sanctuary city?
Yes.
Thank you for your question. Muchas gracias por la pregunta. In every way possible, all right? In every way possible, and that includes the following. Eric Gonzalez, who's a district attorney in Brooklyn, who has been acting as the DA up there ever since Ken Thompson died of, I believe, brain cancer, just got reelected. He just won the election. And he had a real good idea, which is that he had a couple of DAs within his office made responsible for screening criminal defendants to see if they have immigration consequences if they are convicted of certain things. And what he told them is, number one, you have to inform the defense lawyer if there's an immigration consequence, because the Supreme Court says so, and because some of these defense lawyers don't know their immigration law. So they may not do it. So we have a responsibility, even if the defense lawyers fall over themselves and make a mistake, we got a responsibility to make sure that these defendants understand the criminal consequences of pleading guilty or being found guilty of a certain charge. That's one. Two, if you have a case where you can assert a charge that's just as serious but does not result in immigration consequences that are out of proportion to the case. If you have something like that, then we're going to try to find a charge that's of the same level of seriousness that's not going to jackpot you for immigration purposes. Because the reality is, what happens is a lot of people who do have a criminal offense that is not that serious are facing immigration consequences that are huge for an offense that's not that serious. And the law is very peculiar. Certain types of offenses get you thrown out of the country. Other types of offenses, ICE doesn't care about, but they're just as serious. So the whole point is to try to find a way so that the immigration consequence isn't completely out of proportion to the case, and the instruction is for these attorneys who specialize in this within the DA's office to look for that charge that can be used in place of the one that jackpots somebody for immigration purposes.
Last question. Do we have one last question? Thank you. Yeah, no, we just have this one last one. Sorry about that. Your name and
How you doing, Larry? My name is Will from Pittsburgh. First question I wanted to ask you was about the prison industrial complex and how you plan to attack that. And the second question I wanted to ask you was about resentencing. Let's say I get convicted and I get 10 years of probation and I violate on a new charge. Judges have vast discretion on how they could sentence people and potentially ruin lives. Is there any way you can stop this? Because it's destroying people.
Great question. Okay, question 2 is, can you stop judges from being excessive on a violation situation, destroying lives just because of violation of probation? It's an issue we see all the time. District attorneys do not control what judges do, but they make recommendations in a courtroom when there's a violation hearing about what they believe is appropriate. And so what we usually have seen, to be very honest about this, is DAs who followed the company culture, followed the culture of the office, and they come in and ask for too much time or as much time as possible, and judges would go along with it, or at least judges would feel like they had a good reason to do that because that's what the DA is telling them to do, right? So what I can do is, or what I can do if I'm elected, is I can have district attorneys who go in and make reasonable and appropriate recommendations. Somebody gets caught with a little bit of weed in their system. Right now, there's a whole pack of judges who lock them up for a long period of time, even though they're reporting, they're paying the fines and costs, they're not getting new arrests. That's just stupid. I mean, seriously, that's just stupid, because the reality is that little bit of weed in their system is about as bad as having a little bit of beer in your system. And anybody who, you know, even my age, anybody should know that that's reality. So you look for situations like that. You try to change that culture, all that nonsense about how smoking marijuana is such a serious thing. You try to change that. You come in, you try to make reasonable and appropriate recommendations. If you're a bank robber, you rob another bank, you're going to do a bunch of time. But if you're a bank robber and you've been out of trouble for a long time and your violation is that you missed a meeting with your probation officer, but you'd actually been doing pretty well before that, that is a situation where there's, in my view, where there should be a recommendation that you get a talking to and you just continue with your probation as it was. You straighten it out. So we have to be proportional, we have to be reasonable, we have to do what makes sense. And we always have to remember that a year in jail is going to cost taxpayers $42,000. That could be a public school teacher. That could go to get more detectives to solve homicides. That could go to so many purposes. And we shouldn't be giving the stuff away like it's free, and we shouldn't be giving it away like it's water.
So Larry Krasner doesn't get elected just by magic. He gets elected by us going out and volunteering. And he doesn't need to win by a small margin. He needs to win by a very large margin so that we are making a clear mandate for change in this city. We need you to volunteer with the campaign. Voter registration closes on October 10th. Did you know that last year Republicans had a net gain of 31,000 voter registrations in Philadelphia? They did. We need to catch up. We have volunteers who are standing at the door with voter registration packets. Please take them. Get people to register to vote. We have packets with 5 voter registration forms in them each. How many people here can commit to taking a packet and getting 5 people to register to vote? That's it? That's it? We can do it. Please, on your way out, take a packet. Get more people to register to vote. Please make sure that you have filled out our form at the table back there to volunteer, to speak to your neighbors, to knock on doors, to work with the campaign. We have big stacks of literature there. Please feel free to take them and share them with people and help in any way that you can. to get Larry elected in November. Thank you. And
Thank you. Yes, please push that effort. We desperately need something different in the district attorney's office. Right now, we would like to take the time, we should have done it earlier, but this center and the work that's being done here desperately needs funding. And we hate to ask, but it's the reality of helping to push other programs like this and helping women and children. So dig deep. If you can give, please give. This is the opportunity to do it. We're fortunate enough to have a daycare center next door, but we do have to pay them this evening. It's at a discounted rate, but it's still going to be some monies due to this woman next door because we ran a little late and she has a number of kids next door. So please, if you're going to give to the donation for the child care that we have and to do more and future events like the one we had tonight. I thank you all for coming. It was great seeing you. Everyone did everything excellent, right on point. And we'd like to thank Larry Krasner for coming out. Thank you, Larry Krasner.